Today's presentation is called, What is this thing called youth development? It's a presentation of the Sequor Youth Development Initiative, a component of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension service. I'm Peter Witt, a professor emeritus in the Department of Recreation, Park, and Tourism Sciences at Texas A&M University, and I'm pleased to be with you for this presentation. I'd like to share with you a group of principles and practices that will help us better understand what this thing called youth development is all about. Understanding youth development principles will change the way you think about designing and implementing youth development programs and services. Youth development principles come from the field of positive psychology, which is the study of the strengths and virtues that enable individuals and communities and organizations to thrive. This is opposed to the traditional deficit-based approach, which has tried to identify and fix what's wrong with individuals, as opposed to thinking about how do individuals develop. How does each individual have the opportunity to develop to become a fully functioning adult? A key principle in understanding youth development is Karen Pittman's statement, "Problem-free is not fully prepared." Thus, youth services need to help reduce problem behaviors, but more importantly, need to increase the knowledge, values, attitudes, skills, and behaviors related to helping a young person grow to be a fully functioning adult. The key is, someone can be problem-free and still not grow up to be a fully functioning adult. The different approaches are illustrated in this slide. Under the problems or deficits approach, the effort is to reduce the problems and return, in a sense, the individual to a copacetic or even keel without problems. But the real effort is that we need to undertake positive development. And in positive development, we're increasing attitudes, knowledge, and behaviors and trying to move the individual further along to being a fully functioning adult. Consider an analogy from the health field, where illness-free is not necessarily healthy. Just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're fully healthy. Thus, we've undertaken efforts to enhance health through better diet, more exercise, better relationships with others, and expansion of interests and abilities. Thus, we have the twin goals of both reducing illness, but more importantly, creating a healthy lifestyle. Besides problem-free is not fully prepared, there are also several other principles of youth development that are really important. In other words, fully prepared is not necessarily fully engaged. One can have the basic knowledge, abilities, skills, values, and attitudes, but not implement them in terms of how they live their daily lives. Thus, while problem-free is not fully prepared is not necessarily fully engaged. In addition, Pittman reminds us that academic competence, while critical, is not nearly enough. Individuals also need to achieve vocational, physical, emotional, and spiritual competence in order to grow to be a fully functioning adult. But at the same time, competence alone, while critical, is not enough. It's necessary to use that competence by turning it into action. In other words, to use the vocational, physical, emotional, spiritual, and academic skills that we have in order to apply those to our daily lives in order to be fully functioning adults. So, youth development strategies help young people gain good schools, safe and stimulating places to spend time, healthcare, transportation. In other words, the myriad things that are necessary to support the development of growing to be a fully functioning adult. And youth development strategies also provide the nurturing relationships and opportunities to try new roles and to help others. All of these things being critical to the ultimate goal of a fully functioning adulthood. So what's a good definition of youth development? Well, youth development is a process that enables youth to move along multiple pathways to adulthood. There's not just one way to get from childhood to adolescence to successful adulthood. It's a process that supplies the supports, opportunities, programs, and services necessary to acquire the cognitive, social, and emotional, and other skills and abilities required to become a fully functioning adult. In other words, positive youth development addresses the broader developmental needs of youth, in contrast to deficit-based models, which focus solely on fixing youth problems and returning youth to simply a problem-free state. We've talked a lot about the term fully functioning adult, but we need a common vision of what this term really means. There are 4 elements that seem to define what it means to be a fully functioning or a successful adult. These would include the ability to find financially and personally rewarding employment, the ability to form lasting and gratifying partnerships, either with individuals or with groups of other people, the ability to become a contributor in one's community, in other words, giving back in a meaningful way, and the ability to develop and maintain health and a healthy lifestyle. In order to help young people become fully functioning adults, it's important that we see them as assets, not liabilities. It's also important to notice that the business we're involved in is serious. It's important, it's essential, it's critical to the lives of young people. So young people are assets in the making. That means we need to see youth as developing. All youth have strengths. All youth are progressing along pathways to adulthood. All youth have needs. All youth can contribute in their communities. All youth should be valued. Youth should be seen as agents of their own development. They have a role to play in moving along those pathways. And all youth need the opportunity to take responsible roles and act constructively within their communities. In order for young people to achieve the status of being a fully functioning adult, they need our support, opportunities, programs, and services. Supports are the relationships and networks that provide nurturing and guidance for young people, for example, mentoring. Opportunities supply the settings to learn, explore, earn, or express oneself, to try new roles, take on new challenges, contribute to family and community. In other words, opportunities for leadership and decision making. Programs are the organized and structured activities which youth can participate in. For example, academic programs, arts, or sports programs. And finally, services are the elements put in place that make it possible for youth to take advantage of opportunities and programs that we provide, such as transportation, health, instruction, or trainings. When supports, opportunities, programs, and services are plentiful, young people can and do thrive. When their environments are deficient or depleted, youth tend not to grow and progress. So, what does it take to help youth develop into fully functioning adults? Well, think of a garden. This garden took planning and thoughtfulness. It took care, it took attention, it took the right nutrients, the right tools and equipment, the right placement of flowers and trees. In other words, it took intentionality. In order to achieve the full promise of youth development practices, it's necessary to increase the intentionality of what we do. We need to move beyond gym and swim programs, in other words, fun and games, simply designed to keep youth safe and off the streets. We need to move beyond a casual approach to programming than what involves intentionality. What do we want to have happen, and how are we going to make it happen? If created intentionally, we can create more pathways for youth becoming fully functioning adults. and we can put more emphasis on the processes we implement rather than just activities. To be intentional also means we should use something called relationship-based programming. Programming that's dependent on the power of adults in the lives of young people. Adults are effective when they work in partnership with young people. Adults should be seen as supportive friends and advocates in contrast to adults motivated to save, reform, or rescue young people from their circumstances. The primacy of adults in supporting youth efforts to navigate pathways to adulthood is critical. There's an importance of enabling youth to have real voice and power in the planning, organizing, and leading of programs and activities. I hope you found the information contained in this webinar useful. What is this thing called youth development? How do we develop the pathways that will enable young people to fully develop into fully functioning adults? This is Peter Witt on behalf of the Youth Development Initiative of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service.